And this is actually hugely, hugely important. And like Chris, I too feel quite a bit of anxiety when I go into a negotiation. This is a normal feeling. Everybody basically has this because they're tense. There's something to be gained, but there's also something to be lost. And I think a lot of people fear being had. It wouldn't be unreasonable to say that in any negotiation, you fixate on your counterpart's strategy to get the most out of you. It's a natural thought. A negotiation is very much a confrontation, and frankly, you don't want to be duped. But confrontations aren't always bad. Yes, they have the potential to be destructive, but more often than not, they have a greater opportunity to be constructive. Rather than focusing on them, it's time to focus on you. For better outcomes, try preparing yourself first. In the first episode of Season 3 and our Negotiation Elevation series, we tackle how preparing ourselves for a negotiation is one of the best ways to ensure a positive outcome for you and your business. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's Season 3 of Startup Different. I am David. With me is Christopher. Christopher, Negotiation Elevation. That's pretty fun, right? You like negotiating?
Yeah. I absolutely hate it. I think I was born to give away the farm.
Yeah. You're born for a lot of things. This is a theme now from Season 2, where we have our LinkedIn, sort of tagline set up for Chris was born for insert, square bracket insert variable here. But I mean, negotiations are fun. I love them, actually. When I went to buy a car, we're actually going to cover this in the next episode. When I went to buy a car last time, it was fun. I like that. It's a real confrontation. I think.
What did your wife think about that?
Yeah, she didn't like it. We'll talk about that next episode.
Yeah.
Hey, I got a hell of a deal though. I think, but that's a whole thing. So I think this is actually an interesting segue, honestly, like right into this episode. So today, I should probably queue up our lovely listeners at home. Thank you for joining us for Season 3. We hope you enjoyed Season 2. And today, this is our first episode of this season, and it's a first in the series as well of the Negotiation Elevation, sort of 4-episode series. We're really excited. We've got 3 high-powered episodes going deep into some of this content, and then a 4th episode with a guest who is an expert in negotiations, who we will introduce a little bit later in the season. But very exciting times, and I think there's something around negotiations where people are generally very wary and very afraid. But I've been in a ton of negotiations now, so I think part of it is probably just a comfort level. I've done a lot of this. Like when you think about your experience in negotiations, and that can be everything from sales deals to something internal. Like what is your take on your confidence level with that? Now you don't like it, but do you think you're okay at it and you don't like it, or you think you're bad at it and you also don't like it?
Like I've taken negotiations courses. I don't know what it is. I'm just not very good at it. It might be just one of those things that I'm not very good at. I think I really want people to like me and that sort of stuff. So I find that I just give away too much. I'm much more willing to have them, especially with startups and businesses, you're always trying to delight the customer. You want them thrilled with you. So you go the extra mile. And I find when I go into negotiations, I go that extra mile to a fault. And then
can I offer you a piece of extremely public advice?
Sure. Wait, do I want this? Maybe I don't want you to do it.
No. So frankly, it's those are 2 separate things. Wanting someone to like you and doing well in negotiation shouldn't entirely be related. Yeah, you want to build rapport, but rapport is different than liking. Like respect is different than friendship, right? Somebody can respect you, but not like you, right? And I think that what you're trying to do in a lot of negotiations is try to find that gray area. And I think some of it too is you're not good with gray areas. Chris is very binary, black or white, on or off, or we're coding or we're not coding. We're doing the podcast or not doing the podcast. So I think, some of that stems from there. And this is really interesting. And actually really plays well into our topic for today, which is check yourself before you wreck yourself, which is basically just looking internally, understanding ourselves before we go into a negotiation. This is actually hugely, hugely important. And like Chris, I too feel quite a bit of anxiety when I go into a negotiation. This is a normal feeling. Everybody basically has this because they're tense. There's something to be gained, but there's also something to be lost. And I think a lot of people fear being had to some extent. And you're really worried, you tend to go into negotiation. It's really easy to think about the other side first. What are they going to do? What are they going to say? How are they going to take advantage of my position and what I want to get out of this? But what's really interesting is that if you start looking internally, you can put yourself in a better position to be successful. You can really understand your incentives. I'm putting it in my context for just a second. I remember some of the biggest deals we negotiated. They don't have to be big deals either. You can be just as tense about a $3,000 deal as a $300,000 deal, as a $3 million deal. It doesn't really matter, because no matter what, you wouldn't want to be duped in any circumstance. But I do remember that I got really good at understanding, what am I actually motivated in, and what does the business actually need as well, and are these things aligned?
So when we were selling our App Armor safety apps, what was that you were really like looking internally? What were you trying to get out of it? Like, obviously money.
Yeah.
What was there, like, was there something else?
Well, I mean, there's a question. It's a client by client basis, deal by deal basis.
Okay.
You have to understand who they are and what they have. How
Right.
marketable are they? If they get on the platform, is that going to help us? What industry are they in? How much are they actually paying? How long is the contract? How much work do they want us to do? Is there custom development? How much custom development? What's the time period for that? It's actually very complicated when you understand these different incentives. But I knew some basic things. I knew, like, for instance, our development team was very busy, right? So I couldn't go too deep on custom dev. And if they wanted that, I had to push back. But I could maybe give them some if they were a big enough client, because then we would get something else. We would get a really marketable client. So, there's this kind of game that we're going to go deeper on that actually in our next episode, just for what it's worth. But I think that understanding those incentives comes from understanding ourselves. And this isn't entirely, my idea. If it was a sales call, sure, I'd be really motivated, and I'd really want to understand, and I'd really want the money, of course. But you actually have to go pretty deep to understand your own, like, kind of like deeper level motivations, go beyond sort of your business needs, and understand how it all comes together. And so, actually, I listened to something really interesting, and it's actually the crux of our data behind today's podcast, which is on the HBR Idea Cast. I listened to William Ury, who's sort of the goat of negotiations. He's the guy who wrote Getting to Yes. Oh my goodness, I can't remember his co-author right now. We will put it in the credits for the show. It'll be on the website as well. But really interesting perspective. And for him, and I'm going to sort of lay it out the way he did, because I think it's got some important learnings here. But the first thing to understand is that for any good leader, being able to look inward and understand that a core competency of any leader is the ability to negotiate is hugely important right now, particularly in businesses that are more horizontal. And what do we mean by horizontal? We mean, less of the top down, hierarchical, frankly, it's probably more smaller companies, just being totally honest. I mean, you're on Startup Difference, so you're listening to stuff about smaller companies. But I think it's interesting to understand that these negotiations are happening basically all the time, internally or externally. There are different ones, but understanding your own motivations is really, really important to help move your business forward, whether it's an internal or external sort of piece. Now, think about that, Chris. Like, when you think at App Armor, think how often on a daily basis you were negotiating something,
Yeah, for sure.
like
For
every
sure.
day.
Like, you're trying to like convince a developer to do a particular PBI or, particular, feature enhancement to the
Yeah.
software, things like that. And sometimes, I know we always used to joke of, like, if we had to do single sign-on related work, and every developer would just like roll their eyes, and you'd be like trying to come up with, okay, who wants to do the fun SSO work? Everybody loves that. So
Everybody
yeah, you'd
loves
get
doing
into
that.
you'd get into negotiations about like the actual work that people were going to do. That was probably the main like type of negotiation I think I was doing most of the
See,
time.
that's interesting though. And you kind of mentioned, like, who you said the word convince, and it's really, negotiations are an exercise of influence. It's an internal sale. It's kind of like its own animal. And I think people generally shy away from sales. They don't necessarily want to follow it as a profession or what have you, which is fine. If you're a really good software developer, you probably want to write code. But we got to realize is that no matter who you are and what you do, at some point you're selling. At some point you're negotiating. At some point you're trying to convince, whether it's your boss, trying to convince them of giving you a raise, or to let you lead this project, or to do this other thing, or negotiate with an customer externally. Like, no matter what you're doing, you're probably negotiating at least once a day. And then there's also kind of like the negotiating with yourself, kind of that internal dialogue that you also have about like, okay, what do I want to do today? Well, I could do this or that. The next thing, what's important to me? And so I think this is really important. But when it comes to other people, it's important to understand that, it's not a dance off. If we go to a Zoolander reference for a second, it's not a dance off, it's a tango. You dance with the other person. You're working together. You got to get your, salsa, if you will. I actually did salsa lessons with my wife the other day for her birthday. It was a beautiful gift, by the way. Shout out to the good people of the salsa dancing world in Toronto, Ontario. So,
nice.
I'm guessing you've never done salsa dancing,
No,
but
I'm a terrible dancer. Yeah.
So like in salsa, what we want to avoid is actually like reacting. Okay. So let's come back to business. We don't need to talk about dancing, but coming back to business. So I love this line that I heard the other day is like, when you're angry, you'll make the best speech or email you'll ever regret. Okay. So instead we want to prepare by looking inward, thinking back, stepping back from the situation, having calm perspective, and this is really challenging too, especially nowadays, because it's the land or the world of never-ending notifications. We're getting emails and text messages and Slack messages and Google chats and whatever, like constantly all day long. And you're getting weather alerts. You're getting, maybe it's something from your emergency notification system. But it's really, really hard. We're really conditioned right now to be hyper reactive. And that's probably one of the worst things we can do. So focusing on this internal dialogue and looking into yourself is really important. And so on the HBR Idea Cast, one thing that William Murray was talking about is that he was working with the CEO of a 150,000 person company in Brazil. And the CEO was in intense negotiation, and he had a bunch of stuff that he like wanted. And it was, I'm just making this up, like $100 million and, for the company and like a headquarters moved to this place and, this, that, and the next thing.
So wait, was he was this like a job negotiation?
He was taking over the company from his ailing father. I think his father was stepping aside.
Oh, I see.
That kind of thing. So it was kind of like being passed. The baton was being passed, and there was other people in the business, obviously, who were very, I wouldn't call it territorial. They wanted in on it. So, yeah. And so while he had like these business objectives, William actually pushed him to look inward a lot. And he did this by doing what's called the 5 whys. Okay. So asking the person 5 times, why? So, why do you want this thing? Well, because, it's important for this reason. Why? Because why? Because why? And you kind of go this back and forth, and you get to the actual like base level needs of that individual. And what was really interesting about this guy, and this is a little bit weird, but this person was actually kidnapped earlier in their life because they were like the son of a very influential business person in Brazil. They were kidnapped, and eventually, they were bargained for. They were freed, obviously. And what this guy actually wanted the most, what it really boiled down to, was some element of what William sort of quantified as like freedom. And he wanted time with his family to make the business deals that he wanted. He was looking for someone else sort of in the negotiation to work with him on that. And what's crazy is that the business objectives that he had weren't going to deliver that. They weren't going to give him more freedom. They're actually going to make him more tied to work, more tied to business, away from his family.
So he was almost negotiating and getting things that he didn't want, is what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, he was like misaligned with himself.
Yeah. Well, okay.
So he needed to look inward to understand his true incentives.
So the 5 whys dug down to this like, need for freedom. And then that changed what he was actually wanted out of the negotiation. Was that the crux of the story?
Yeah. Yeah. And he negotiated much better once he understood what he actually needed. So I thought maybe we could try this. Because one of the things that Chris, you're not confident with negotiations. That's fine. I get that. But one of the things I always chiefly negotiated was stuff around custom development for our software product.
Right. Yeah.
So just setting the table, I would normally want to charge an unbelievable amount of money because it's so much work and it would disrupt sort of the other things we were developing. And,
or you'd want to say no to the client and say, no, we're not going to add that feature. Right. Okay.
Whereas you would always, what would you want to do?
I would always say yes. And, I wouldn't want to charge them. I might want to pay them. We always joked that like, we'll pay you to do this feature request.
Yeah, that was actually a running joke in the business. Yeah. Chris will pay you if you do this. Please let us do it. And so let's understand. So why did you want to do that? Why did you want to say yes?
Okay, so this is where we're going to very much differ, where I always end up at yes with these 5 whys on the thing that I should probably be saying no. So like, let's think about it. So customer says, hey, I want this new feature. So I want to say yes. Why do I want to say yes? And the first reason is like, well, we're a company, we need to make revenue. Okay,
Okay,
so that's the first reason.
why?
Okay. Why do we need to make revenue is
Yeah.
because, well, we have to make a profit, so that,
Okay.
we're still growing the business and that sort of stuff.
Okay. Well, why do we need to grow the business? Like, why do we need profit to grow the business?
Because like we want to keep everybody employed. We want
Okay.
to keep like,
Why do we want to keep everybody employed?
because like we need to buy food and pay our mortgages and rents and car loans and things like that. So
Why?
yes. Now that's
I think we already had 5. That was the sixth. That was the sixth why. But yeah, so it gets down though fundamentally to we need food and money for cars and like life. We need to like live effectively, right?
So it pushes back at you though, Dave. So what was wrong with my answers to that? Like I ended up with, yes, we're going to do this because it's going to generate revenue, which generates profits, which keeps people employed, which
hang
pays...
on, because it's more nuanced than just generating revenue. It was, we need to generate enough revenue. We need to make enough money to be able to ultimately live our lives, have the car, have the house, have the condo, have the food. The food is kind of a funny one, so that I can consume, so I can go out on Friday nights. Like, so it wasn't a question that I didn't necessarily want to do it, but it was a question of the capacity that our development team had, which I had a very objective view of, I think.
Right.
You're kind of more in it. And then secondly was, okay, we need to be generating enough money to do that. I think also too, you would see potential in something that was built. So you would say, okay, we're going to build feature X, Y, or Z. Then our sales team's going to take it to the market. They're going to sell it a bunch of times. And founders are crazy optimists by nature. We've covered this before in another episode, but we're like way more optimistic on average than the other person. So you would believe that we could take this out to the market and make a ton of money. Whereas I was pretty close to the customer in the market, and I would have a gut call. I wouldn't have a ton of data, but I could ask customers on some occasions. And if it wasn't going to work, it wasn't going to work. And I would be a hard sell for me to want to support even offering that to the customer for any amount of money.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really astute observation, because I can think of many circumstances where I built features and was just like, thrilled with how it came out and been like, every customer is going to want to buy this. And then nobody bought it. Nobody wanted it.
And not for lack of trying either. Like we did take it to market in some cases. To be fair though, you have been also hugely right. The vaccine passport, the vaccine verification, COVID functions were a huge gamble, but man, that paid off. And it didn't look like it was going to work at first. And we've had other things that just never got past 1, 2, 3 customers. In some cases, only one customer using it, which is like the worst case scenario. First off, we have this like outlier code that we can't really use.
Because then you have to support it. If you only have one customer with that feature, and then you're like, oh, shucks, now we have to keep supporting this piece of software, this feature. So it can be, I don't know. I think part of my thinking on it too was, I did a lot of work like at night and on the weekends, because I could really it was good cave time. It was like nobody would bother me then. And I always felt like, hey, if I said yes to it and it really came down to a time crunch, I could just burn the midnight oil over the evening or the weekend or whatever to build that feature. So
that's
I always
the other
felt
danger
like,
though. You felt like, and in many cases you could do almost anything. So for the what is it, for the carpenter or for the hammer, every problem is a nail, something like that.
Chris loves these.
Let's go metaphor. Cue drum roll.
Metaphors. Yeah. To a person carrying a hammer, every problem is a nail.
There you
go. And so for me, I would never think of like a negotiation as a potential way to, solve that issue. I would always go to, I'll write code, because that's what I do. Right.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something like, I guess that's that looking internally, and maybe I need to like look internally and realize that, hey, I have a bias to writing code to solve everything, when in reality, I should be actually thinking beyond just that that hammer that I'm carrying.
And
right?
I don't want to
Is
like,
that where you're going?
and pun intended here, I don't want to hammer this point too much, but I do want to say, I do think you got better at this over time, because I actually think you increasingly understood your incentives weren't that you wanted to make more code, or that you wanted to make more code that people would use and that people would pay a lot for. And that happened over time. At first, it wasn't as much like that. It was more just like, I'll make it a thing so somebody will use it and maybe we'll get more traction. Whereas it became more concrete, because I do think you looked inward over time and understood, hey, I don't want to do those crazy hours if I'm not actually going to get the payout. I want to be more solid on it. So I think over time, you did become better at this. But
yeah.
So so we looked inward here a bit. So we got these 5 whys. So it's the first part of our framework today. Then secondly, you have to kind of consider the type of negotiation you're having, because you need to get your negotiating partner in the same zone of looking inward. That's really going to help guarantee a very successful and like amicable negotiation. So how do we do this? Well, let's start with the 2 different kinds of negotiations. You have your internal negotiations, which are basically constantly happening all the time. If your founder employee comes up to you, asks you something, you don't really want to do it, or maybe you want to do some of it, you go back and forth. That's every day, every single day. If you work at HR, you know what I'm talking about. This is just the thing. But for a lot of these, let's say we're, the sales team's trying to convince the development team to build a new feature. So for a lot of these, it's, you've got to get sort of like an airing of the grievances. So you have a meeting with a couple of people, you get together. Salespeople say, okay, hey, we wanted to build this. The development team just says flat no. We're not going to do this. We're too busy, whatever. And then you kind of do the 5 whys. So like, why? Ultimately, it's going to come down to, well, we don't have enough time or resources, or we're committed to all these other things you've already sold. Like, this can't happen. And so, but then as a salesperson or another, just, collaboratively problem solving, you would say, okay, maybe we need a bigger time horizon. Maybe the customer needs to pay more so we can add another person, which is a little complicated, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, have more resources on a project to help improve it. But the idea is this: you need to help people drill down, help the other side drill down to their own incentives, so that you can actually problem solve for the real issues, as opposed to the surface level resistance. Is kind of how I'd coin that. So
yeah.
So and I've actually found that it's helpful in some of the negotiations to just tell people what you're doing. Make yourself a little bit vulnerable. Say, well, I'm looking inward, and maybe you would say this, considering what we want. That's maybe the business way to put it. We're looking at, I want these incentives. I want to get your brand on our website because it's really, really good for our business.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Then the other side knows, okay, that's nice of them to position that. Now they can decide if they want to try to hose you, good Canadian term there, but if they want to, sort of take advantage of the situation. But, that's relatively low risk. So what if they don't not on the website? On your sales calls, you can still feature them. You can still mention them without it being as public as the website. There's other ways to benefit. But it's just sort of, sometimes it can help understand and signal to the other side, hey, I want to work with you. I want to collaborate.
Right on.
And this sort of got this, and William Ury had an awesome quote that I'm just going to take here really quick, is that you don't push, you attract. Okay, so I think this is a fundamental shift in a lot of negotiation styles for a lot of people. You're not out there to push your side. You're trying to pull them to your way of thinking. And that's really, really, really different. So in an external negotiation, like, this is going to be harder anyway, because there's usually lawyers, and you want to get out there, but you don't want to project your needs. You want to offer possibilities for a collaborative sale. And so this is pretty challenging. But I swear I didn't tell Mr. Uri to put this out there, but on the podcast, he suggests, how do you do this? Well, it comes down to understanding, empathizing, and actually listening, and not listening so you can counter, but listening to understand.
I got you. Yeah,
does that make sense?
It's a subtle difference, but yeah, no, it makes sense.
Well, because people just see it as a fight.
Yeah,
it's not a fight. You're building something together. You're collaborating, and signaling that respect by being a little bit vulnerable, by putting it out there a little bit, and then making them feel heard. If they come to you and they say, look, we're really interested. We have a budget, and this is a classic sales guy, just like, particularly for, I'll say, younger salespeople, because they really want to stick to the price sheet. And, the person will say, well, our budget is, I don't know, $8,000. Okay. And you go, and you send them a quote for 10. What are you doing? You get, like, it sounds dumb, but you got to hear them. You got to understand what they need. Or if they're like, well, we can't work on this for 6 months. Okay. And classic sales move here would be, give them the quote, say, let's sign the deal now, but we won't invoice you for 6 months, and maybe we can have some sort of, you just get them committed. But the idea is like, you're listening to them, you're understanding their needs. If you don't understand their needs and their unique circumstances or how they want to use your software or your product or your service or whatever, you're not going to go very far. So
yeah, well said. Absolutely.
So, and he calls this the golden bridge. So again, this is, which I think is again, if you're thinking that halfway analogy, this is the
Right.
bridge from their position to yours. You make it easier, not harder. So it's and then lastly, on kind of on that reaching and making yourself vulnerable is sometimes, so there's a term that from getting to yes, that's called the ZOPA, the zone of potential agreement. It's an acronym, ZOPA. Or ZOPA for our American friends. But it's, the idea is like, that's the area in which the two sides can meet. And, if you really can signal that clearly, a good negotiating like other side will meet you halfway. Again, you kind of want to tease this out, because depending on who you're negotiating with, you don't want to give them all of your positions, because they may take you for a bath. I remember you alluded to the MBA, our MBA training when we did negotiations. And I remember, especially when negotiating people who have in different cultures or either corporate cultures or like ethnic backgrounds, negotiating is very different. And some people will just take you for a ride. So,
yeah. One of my good friends from India in our MBA class, we did like a fake negotiation, just cleaned me out. Like just was working, he was playing 3-dimensional chess and I was playing checkers. Like it was crazy. Yeah. But yeah, there's a cultural aspect to it as well. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and then one really last important point here too, in terms of this pushing and attracting, is that sometimes people fear the BATNA. And I think we mentioned this on a previous episode, was that it's another acronym, but it's the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, BATNA. And you want to know it before going into the negotiation. That's obvious. But a lot of people think it's negative thinking, right? Okay, so I'm going to go into this and I better know what I can fall back on. Paradoxically, it actually heightens the likeliness of reaching a good outcome, because it realizes the comfort you have in your own position. You're not really as worried about getting duped, because you can fall back on something really solid. So you go into it less confrontational. You're already more calm, more in that perspective, that inward looking, that grounded zone to do this.
So when you were doing, B2B sales, what was your BATNA on negotiating an app deal with a potential client? Like, is it like, my best alternative to a negotiated agreement is lose the deal? I don't know. In that scenario, maybe that
depends. So let's say so big client, you really want them. You're going to move a lot of mountains to make that happen. But I'll give you it was more common in custom development things. So let's say we have a big client. They want us to do a huge custom development. We're not talking like anything trivial, like almost borderline a new product line. Like we've had this. I think of some of the engagements we had near the end of our time at AppArmor. And, the BATNA, so yeah, it might be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay. Let's say it's worth, I don't know, $500,000. So going into that, I would think to myself, yeah, it's a lot of money, but it's just as much work. So let's say it's again, $500,000. So I would say, well, can I get 10 deals at 50,000? Yeah, it definitely can.
That's
over the year. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So am I willing to actually do this? Is this actually good for us? It changes you can't just like look at the gold. And
so if you can't land a deal in that ZOPA, then your best alternative is go out and sell it to somebody else or 10 other clients at 50,000 or something like that. That's interesting. Yeah.
You have to understand. I think it's helpful to understand their BATNA too. And sometimes you can get them to state it in the negotiation, where when you're building that rapport, you're creating that collaboration with them.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll say, well, we got no other option right now. Well, then you kind of know that you're in a really strong negotiated position. If they're like, well, we're looking at a bunch of options, or we're thinking about whatever, it's a lot more competitive. It's a lot tougher.
Yeah. Like vendor A, vendor B, vendor C. Yeah.
Ultimately, you have to be willing to lose any deal for the greater good of the company. This is a tough thing for salespeople, because salespeople aren't instructed this way. Salespeople are instructed to get every deal. Absolutely. It's actually directly related to their incentives. And frankly, they don't really care. And I mean this in the right way, but they don't really care, because they're going to make their money. They're going to go home and they're going to be able to put the food on the table that we've alluded to. but it may have significant like ripple effects on the way the product is implemented or how it's implemented or if it's been implemented before. And that is something as a founder, when you're negotiating a deal, you have to be really aware of. It's not just about the money, it's about the impact on the rest of the business. So,
yeah, right on.
All right, so this again became one of the Dave likes to talk a lot episodes. Sorry, I apologize.
We knew this was going to be an 80% Dave and a 20% Chris episode right from the get-go, but that's all good.
I thought the 5 whys was interesting, though. I thought that was, it's a good exercise to understand what you're interested in. So let's wrap this up. So summary, focus on yourself first, then your counterparts. It's about you. It's about understanding your perspective. Before you can negotiate effectively, you need to know you. You're looking for composure. Use those 5 whys. And remember, you don't push, you attract. We listen, we understand, we empathize, and we build that golden bridge from their side to ours so that we can reach a good conclusion. Yeah. So, boom, episode 1, season 3, Startup Different. Right. Thanks so much, folks, for joining us. We will catch you next week with another installment of our negotiation elevation series. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us. If you like what you heard, subscribe to and rate Startup Different in your favorite podcast app. If you want to see our radio faces, check us out on YouTube at Startup Different and look us up on social. We're probably there if you are. And lastly, do you want to feature your startup on the show? Reach out via our website, startupdifferent.com. See you next time.